Hi everyone, I'm Ronak Onkar from PPFS Mutual Fund. Good evening and welcome to yet another virtual event of FOF. And today presenting will be Raj Mehta, Fund Manager at PPFS Mutual Fund, and he'll be walking us through the alcoholic beverages industry. So over to you, Raj. Cheers.
Cheers, Ronak. The reason for choosing the topic is that I thought since the market is at an all-time high, COVID cases are at an all-time high, so let us all get high now. Probably all of you are going to need this after my presentation because I'm going to throw a lot of data, a little bit of hypothesis from my side, which you guys might not be convinced about. So we may discuss it post my presentation. Uh, so the basic process of how spirits and alcohol is made is basically it's made from molasses, sugar byproduct, or grains or barley, depending on the spirit that you are making. It goes to the distillery through which you get ENA. ENA is basically used in many other cases as well, like perfumes, cosmetics, some pharma products like antiseptics, and some industrial uses for printing, paints, etc. And it is used over here as well. So recently we have seen a lot of price increases in this area on the ENA side, on the raw material side. So a lot of the players have been shifting their raw material base towards grains instead of molasses. From this, you either make a bulk spirits or country liquor or IMFL. If it's IMFL, then it goes to the bottling and the packaging part where you actually make it look good and then sell it in the retail market. From there, it goes to either consumers like you and me, or depends in the canteen stores department, or it is exported outside. So let us look at the global alcoholic beverages industry. So it's about 1.43 trillion in 2017, and in the latest number, there is about 1.5 trillion plus, and it's expected to reach 1.7 trillion by 2025. So basically, it's not a very high growth kind of an industry. The CAGR has been about 2-3% in the recent years. The top players in the industry are Diageo with about 20% market share. Pernod Ricard is the second player with about 10% market share. And if you look at the other players, they are pretty small. So all of them have less than 5% market share. Beam Suntory is, the product that it has is Jim Beam, which is very famous. Allied Blenders and Distilleries is an Indian company, and Officer's Choice is the brand that they sell. Bacardi is there, and the pink part which you see is Brown Forman, which sells Jack Daniels. It has about 2%. So if you see, it's a very fragmented industry with the top player having 20% market share and top two players having 30%. Rest all are below 5% kind of a market share. And this is the global side that I am talking about. Let's focus on the Indian Alcobev industry today. So the only slide that I had on the global Alcobev industry was the first slide. Now we'll be totally focusing on the Indian industry today, given that this industry is very regulatory oriented, plus depends on the local regulations, and it's you need to look at different factors to evaluate this industry. So let us be Atmanirbhar today and look at the Indian industry. Uh, so the Indian industry is at about 35 billion. It's the third largest in the world, behind China and Russia, and it accounts for about half of the world's whiskey consumption. So we consume a lot of whiskey, and it's more than 3x of any other country. According to WHO, this is a last year's report. Close to 30% of the Indians consume alcohol products, and they have given a wide range of 4 to 13% as the daily consumers. So even if you take the higher end of 10-12%, I think the penetration is pretty low on this. The per capita consumption of alcohol per adult has grown at about 38% CAGR from 2010 to 2017. 2017, and in the last 2 years also it has grown in that range only. And but the per capita consumption is still pretty low at 6 liters per adult. So many of you would have seen this video which was viral recently on social media, where some lady in North India was talking just before the Delhi lockdown. She was outside the wine shop and she was telling that dawa kaam nahi karti hai, daru karti hai. I just have one peg every day and that takes care of my health. So we have a lot of people who are daily consumers and a lot of people consuming country liquor, which is actually not captured in some of the numbers because it's unorganized. So, what are the long-term growth drivers for the alcobev industry? So, we know that we have a young population where between 18 and 40 we have a huge population. So, that is there. Second is per capita consumption is increasing as more and more people enter the legal drinking age. You will get more and more people consuming it. Then the rising disposable incomes not only shifts people from consuming country liquor to IMFL, but also within IMFL from the lower end products to the higher end products. Then you see the rapid urbanization of tier 2 cities where you see more and more acceptability of alcohol. In social settings also, if you see, alcohol is being accepted now. So all these factors have been there for the last few years. This narrative has been intact for at least last 5 to 7 years. But if you see the growth numbers of this industry, that doesn't tally with this narrative. So if you see the volume growth for the industry has been in the range of 5 to 7%. This I am talking about the last 10 years CAGR, and revenue growth has been a little higher in terms of 8 to 12% if you look at either beer industry or the spirits industry. But if you look at some consumer staples like biscuits or hair oils, they have also grown in the same range despite higher penetration. So I would not say that this narrative is totally correct. Somewhat it may be correct, but it's not translating into the numbers. So this is the chart that I would like to show. So if you look at the whole alcohol industry, this includes beer, spirits, everything. It's grown. The volume CAGR has been at about 8% from 2006 to 2018, whereas the value CAGR has been about 11%. So country liquor is something where you don't get reliable numbers, so I have not included it over here. And if you look at the industry volumes, country liquor forms about one third of the volumes, whereas IMFL is one third. And if you look at beer, which is 21%, and home brewed alcohol, which is 11%, so that also accounts for about one third. Wine is only 4% of the volumes. IMFL obviously includes whiskey, brandy, rum, etc. We'll look at it how that is bifurcated between all these segments. So if you look at the volume and value market share of these sub-segments, so beer constitutes a large volume market share because of a lot of reasons which we'll see later. Whereas if you see on the value side, since it's priced a little lower, value-wise it's about 20% kind of number. Whereas if you see whiskey is about 30% in terms of volume market share, whereas value-wise it's about 56%. So whiskey is something which a lot of companies are focusing on, and it's a segment which has been growing pretty fast as well compared to the other segments. Whereas if you see brandy and rum, they are also lower price products, and hence the value market share is not that. So let's look at the overall Indian Alcobev market share. So UB Group is United Breweries, which is now owned by Heineken, and ED owns about 15-16% stake. ED Enforcement Directorate. The cases are going on, and most probably Heineken will be a majority shareholder in this company. Diageo has about 17% share. Anheuser-Busch at about 10%. Anheuser-Busch is a company which has struggled in India since inception. So it has been here in India since many years, and after acquisition of Sam Miller, They had actually some very good brands like Foster's, which had done well in India, but they have struggled with those brands and they haven't been able to get market share. Whereas on the other hand, two players who have done well are Pernod Ricard and Carlsberg. So Pernod Ricard with some of its brands have done really well on the spirit side, whereas Carlsberg with the launch of Tuborg about 3 years back, they have done really well. And some other local players, like breweries, Radico Khaitan and Mohan Mekin, have been doing well for themselves. So let us look at the whiskey. So since I told you that whiskey forms about 55 or 56% of the value market share, let's look at the whiskey market share. So USL or Diageo India, as it is called now, has about 34% market share, whereas Pernod Ricard is at 13% and it's been growing faster than USL. Allied Breweries is another player which has been doing very well with its Officer's Choice brand. So it has about 11% market share, and it was supposed to come out with its IPO about a year back, but I don't know, the IPO process has been delayed. Radico Khaitan is a listed company with 5% market share, and Mohan Mekin is a small player with 5%. So let's look at the brands that each of these companies have. So I'll not go through all the brands. If you look at the major brands in the whiskey side for United Spirit, Johnny Walker, McDowell's, Royal Challenge, Black Dog, Signature, VAT 69, Antiquity Blue, Bailey's, all these brands you would have heard of. So they have been doing pretty well on the whiskey side. Whereas Pernod Ricard, if you see, Blender's Pride, Imperial Blue, and Chivas Regal have been doing really well for them. Royal Stag also has been doing well for them. Radico Khaitan is doing well on 8 p.m. and Rampur India single malt is also doing well. Allied Breweries and Distilleries, as I said, it has that Officer's Choice umbrella brand under which they have a lot of sub brands. And Mohan Mekin has some brands which we in sitting in urban India would not have heard, but some other parts of the country doing well. John Distilleries is again a smaller player with some brands, the main brand being Paul John and then sub brands. Let's look at the beer segment. So beer segment is something which is more consolidated in terms of market share. So there are three major players, whereas others are small players or micro breweries which have been growing now. So United Breweries has about 54% market share in terms of volume. Anheuser-Busch and SAB Miller both together now have about 21% market share, and Carlsberg at about 16%. So Carlsberg has over the past 2 years been taking market share for Anheuser-Busch, whereas UB Group also has recovered some of its lost market share in the which they lost in the Vijay Mallya days. So let's look at the brands that each of these players have. So first two columns are United Brewery, then AB InBev plus SAB and Carlsberg. So Carlsberg basically has Carlsberg and Tuborg. AB InBev and SAB has Castle, Foster, Hayward's, Budweiser, Corona. So if you look at some of these brands, the brands are really good, but they haven't been able to, localize kind of the selling practices and the distribution. They haven't been able to expand. Plus the manufacturing facilities that you need to set up in every state. All these things have been a little slow on their side, and that's why they haven't been able to do that well. Whereas United Breweries, if you see, Kingfisher still, the Kingfisher umbrella brand still accounts for about 85 to 90% of their beer volume. So they have launched lot many sub brands within Kingfisher, but the main Kingfisher brand itself accounts for about 85-90% of the volume. From the Heineken stable, they have Heineken and Amstel, which have been doing well recently on the super premium side. And one thing which is very peculiar to the beer market in India is that 75 to 80% of the beer market is strong beer, whereas if you look at the global beer industry, it's the other way around. So 75-80% would be mild beer and 20% would be strong beer. So it's a totally different market in terms of beer. Also, the distribution is quite different. So here we sell it only through wine shops, whereas in globally, you will see beer being sold through retail stores. So let's look at the some of the regulatory complexities that both beer and the spirits industry have to go through. Some of them, and some of them might be new to you. So let's discuss some of them. Yeah. So this is a India map where if you see, I'll talk about four types of markets. So let's just get one out of the way. So prohibition, where the states where alcohol is prohibited. So that is in red. So Gujarat, Bihar, Nagaland, partly banned in Manipur, and Mizoram, which is actually in blue, is now red. So recently in 2019, they have banned alcohol in Mizoram as well, and Lakshadweep also alcohol is banned. So these are the states or union territories where alcohol is banned, and there are some free or open markets. So there are some complexities here. So if you look at the green part, that's the states where it's a free or open market. So what does this mean? Free or open market means any private business can apply for a license for a fee, and which is defined by the state government, and they have the flexibility to sell it in their own way. Also, the company has reasonable independence in terms of price increases. Whereas if you look at the other type of markets like auction market or state-owned markets, either the license to sell in the market is restricted by the governments, or the price hikes are controlled by the government. So we have a lot of hybrid markets also, where one part is controlled by the government, whereas other is left to the distribution outlet. So it's quite a complicated industry in that sense. Each state has its own rules, and given that alcohol is not under GST yet, the companies still have to fight with the states for the excise duty. So if you look at the excise duty per case for UBL, so beer, this is for beer, that's grown at a CAGR of 17%, which is not a small number. And for USL on the spirit side also, it's grown at about 13%. It's a very, very steep hike. Whereas if you see the last 2 or 3 years, I think on the beer side, the excise duty hasn't been increased that much, whereas spirits has been continuously increasing. So what this does is, uh, you know, the price differs from state to state, and the movement also of alcohol from one state to another is restricted. So if you just look at two examples, so one on the left side where McDowell's number one premium whiskey, 750 ml bottle, if you see the prices across states is drastically different. So Delhi is around 380, whereas a Kerala would be around 900 rupees, and all other states in between. This is mainly due to the excise duty. And if you see the MRP of Kingfisher Strong Beer 650 ml bottle, it's between 130 and 160. So there's no correlation of excise duty between spirits and beer. If you look at Delhi, it's very low in on the spirit side, whereas it's more or less similar to other states, or higher, even higher than some of the states on the beer side. Whereas if you look at the southern states, spirits are taxed higher than beer. So there's no correlation between the two segments. So what this basically does is, there is lack of pricing power for the company. Since in some of the states the selling prices are controlled by the government, if the excise duty is increased or the raw material price increases, they are not able to pass it on to the consumers, and hence the margins of these companies are hit. So one is that. Second, if you see, as I said, it's still outside the purview of GST, whereas the inputs are part of the GST, and hence the GST that they pay on the raw materials, they don't get credit for it. So that's a cost for them. So all these things taken into account, there is a lack of pricing power for these spirits as well as beer companies. So if you see the gross revenue per case, this is for USL specifically. The gross revenue per case has increased at 9% CAGR, whereas the net revenue per case has increased only at 3% CAGR, and gross profit per case has increased at 4% CAGR. So that's the reason I was saying that they don't have pricing power. So so even though I don't want to discuss individual companies, given that USL is 50% of spirits market in India, and UBL or United Breweries 50% of the beer market, I thought I'll just look at these companies briefly. Again, not discussing too much in detail about these companies. United Spirits, which is now Diageo India, it's a subsidiary of Diageo PLC, and it's the largest spirits company in India, second largest in the world by volume. Value-wise, obviously, it is lower given that the premium whiskey or the premium spirits are much lower. It has a brand portfolio of about 100 brands, and company obviously doesn't make beer because it's group company, earlier erstwhile group company, United Breweries makes beer. Company produces and sells around 80 million cases per year, and it has about 15 brands which sell more than 1 million. So out of the top 20 brands in India, 10 brands belong to Diageo India or United Spirits, as you want to call it. It has a pan-India presence with 49 manufacturing facilities and a distribution network of 80,000 outlets. So the last point, just to emphasize, both these things are very, very important, because the more number of manufacturing facilities you have in different states, the greater the advantage. At the same time, obviously, distribution is also a very, very big advantage here. So uh, since all the regulations are at the state level, you need to have a manufacturing facility within the state and distribute it within the state rather than moving it from one state to the other. So the top players have a advantage in terms of manufacturing and distribution. Just to go a little bit into the history of this company. So this company was started as a trading company, and it was founded by Angus McDowell, a Scottish national in India, in 1826, and Vittal Malia, the father of Vijay Malia, used to run United Breweries Group, and they acquired McDowell's and Company. Again, they made several acquisitions, including Shaw Wallace, and Vijay Malia took over as the chairman in sometime in 1983. And then they merged a lot of these companies sometime in 2006. 2007, they made a big acquisition of White and Mackay, and that was a very, very big acquisition for them. In 2013, Diageo acquired 54-55% of United Spirits, and since then, they have made a lot of changes which we will look into. So, what has Diageo done post its acquisition? So, this has been a transformation of this company. So, the operating margins have moved from about 10-11% to 17%. EBITDA margins have moved from single digits to 16%. PAT margins have grown from 1% to 7%. Return ratios obviously were negative at that point in time. They have grown to a decent level. ROE is at 18%, ROC is at 22% now. Debt has been reduced from 5,000 crores to 2,000 crores now, and probably in the next 2 years, they will be net debt free. Debt equity ratio has come down from 2.8 times to 0.5 times. Cash conversion cycle has become negative, so working capital is something which they will not require. They have totally deleveraged the balance sheet, and the interest coverage ratio has improved from 2 times to 6 times. RCB, which is a team which they own, it has compounded revenue at 14% from 2014 to 2020. And in FY19, they had made a good profit. FY20 obviously was a abnormal year due to COVID, and hence they made a profit of only 4 crores. So basically, RCB is something which they are using as a marketing tool rather than anything. given that they are not able to advertise their liquor brands. This is used as a marketing. Some of the focus brands that they have, so they have defined some focus brands where they have been really putting all their resources on, whereas others they have been sidelined to some extent. So they have divided their segments into popular, prestige, premium, and luxury. Popular is less than 350 rupees for 750 bottle, 750 ml bottle. Prestige is between 350 and 900. Premium is 900 to 2000, and more than 2000 is counted as luxury. So now what they have done is they have divided their products into two categories mainly. One is popular and second is prestige and above. So everything that you see in the first three rows is basically prestige and above. And what we have seen in the recent years is that prestige and above segment is something which has been growing really well for them. And popular is a segment where they have been franchising the production of those brands to some local distilleries and hence saving costs on them. So we look at those numbers a little later. So just to give you a sense of what the margins are in each of these segments. So popular, the margins are about 2 to 5%, whereas the higher you go, the margins also become higher. And popular is about 25% of the segment, whereas prestige is 30% with about 9-10% margins. Premium is about 15% of the segment with about 15 to 18% margins. Deluxe is about 5% of the segment with 20% margins. Scotch is obviously a premium segment with about 40% plus margin. And then there are these local brands with 7-8% margin. So clearly popular is a segment which they have been trying to outsource or franchise to local distilleries since the margins are very, very low. So if you look at the bifurcation between popular and prestige and above segments for them, popular as a segment has come down from 78% to 49%, whereas at the same time, prestige and above is something which has grown from 20% to 50%. So obviously the margins and the return numbers which we saw, which increased post the Diageo acquisition, have been because of this as well. So, what are the major costs for a spirits company? So, raw materials obviously is about one third of the cost. Packaging materials is another cost which is very, very high for them given the glass packaging that they need to do, and the glass prices have been on the rise for a few years now. And other costs are pretty low. So, raw materials and packaging materials, apart from obviously the excise duty, is a very, very big cost. So, as I said in my first slide, so many spirits companies have been moving from molasses-based ENA to a grain-based ENA. Given that the prices of molasses have been increasing very, very rapidly, also molasses are used for some other purposes, and hence the demand for molasses has been on the rise. So USL, if you see the grain-based spirits as a percentage of the USL basket, that has gone up from 10% in 2008 to 70%. So more or less, they have been able to shift their raw material base from molasses to grain-based. Now, let's look at a competitor who has done well in India. Globally, obviously, they have done well. But if you look at particularly in India, they have done pretty well in the last 5 or 6 years. And if you look at the growth rates, they have grown much, much faster than USL and with higher margins and return numbers. So if you look at the volume mix of Pernod Ricard India, so this is only India specific. If you look at the Indian business, 45% is Imperial, 36% is Royal Stag, Blenders Pride is about another 13%, whereas all the other brands constitute another 5-6%. So let's compare both the companies. If you look at the number of cases sold, USL is at 80 million cases versus 55 million of Pernod Ricard. Whereas if you look at the EBITDA per case, Pernod Ricard is almost double of USL. Gross margin wise, there's not that big a difference, around 45-50%. That's fine. Whereas if you look at the EBITDA margins, Pernod Ricard is at 25% versus 16% for USL, and 16% is also after 5 years of premiumization, 5 years of cost cutting, 5 years of reducing debt and everything. If you look at return on equity, it's been pretty similar. Whereas if you look at return on capital employed, Pernod Ricard is at 17%, whereas 12 versus 12% for USA. So if you look at both the brands, both the companies, if you see, Pernod Ricard is very good in prestige and above segment. So prestige, again, uh, this is bifurcated. Prestige is bifurcated between lower prestige, mid prestige, upper prestige. But if you look at the brands, uh, Blenders Pride has done well compared to Signature and Antiquity, whereas Royal Stag has done well compared to Royal Challenge. Imperial Blue has done well compared to McDowell's. And in the popular or the lower end segment, Pernod Ricard is not at all present. So that's where the margins for USL are much lower, and that's why if you see the shift towards franchising of these popular brands. If you see bottled in India premium brands, both of them have about 40-45% market share. So there's not much difference between there. Bottled in origin is a segment where USL has an advantage given the Diageo's global brand that it has and which it can bring to India going ahead. So just a quick comparison between the four companies. So here I have compared USL against Diageo PLC, which is a UK listed company, Radico Khaitan, which is listed in India, and Pernod Ricard, which is listed abroad. So this is just to see where Indian companies stand in terms of margins and return numbers versus the global peers. Again, in the same segments, I have not compared Heineken or Carlsberg to United Spirits. I have compared Diageo and Pernod to United Spirits. So if you look at the gross margins, Diageo and Pernod, which are global companies, the gross margins are much higher, whereas Radico Khaitan and United Spirits, it's much lower. So that's a big gap. And if you look at the EBITDA margins, it's a similar story. So Diageo and Pernod Ricard, the global companies have about 30 to 33% EBITDA margins, whereas Radico and United Spirits have about 15 to 17% kind of margin. So the big drop that you see in the blue line is sometime in 2014 post the Diageo acquisition, where they cleaned up the books and hence there were losses there. The return on equity numbers, if you see, Diageo has been doing pretty well with about 34% return on equity, whereas United Spirits is the blue line. So I have purposely ignored the 2012 to 2017 period where they actually cleaned up the books, and some years in between they had a negative equity as well. So I have purposely ignored that period, and I have just given 2017 to 2020 numbers. Pernod Ricard is so in the last 1 or 2 years, the ROE has come down globally, but overall it's been about 10 to 12%, and which is pretty decent if you look at the global ROE number. Return on capital employed. So again, United Spirits is doing pretty well in the last 2 or 3 years, and given the Indian interest rates, obviously this number will be higher for the Indian companies compared to the other. Let's shift our focus towards beer now. We looked at spirits in detail. Let's look at beer a little bit in detail. So, why would people prefer beer? Cost is one of the factors, given the cost of the beer is much lower versus the spirits. Convenience is obviously there, where you can just buy a bottle and move around with the bottle. Uh, Also, in India, most of the consumers don't have spirits on the rocks, so they need mixers and everything, which becomes complicated. Whereas for beer, you just need a bottle and you can move around. It's a much lighter option in case you don't want to get high, uh, given the lower alcohol content. There's a huge weather-driven consumption which happens. So, you look at the quarterly numbers of United Breweries, the first quarter, which is the summer season, accounts for about 30% of the revenues, whereas on the EBITDA side, it's much higher. So, last 2 years they have had COVID related disruptions in the first quarter. So we'll have to see how they cope up with it. Other thing which I want to focus on is that there have been emergence of microbreweries in India, which are about 180 in number as of today. Still pretty small, but some of these brands are becoming big. Someone like a Bira or White Owl or Simba. So some of these are becoming big, and we look at the market share. So in terms of market share numbers, they are still pretty low, but they have been growing pretty fast. So they have private equity money, and they have been doing well over the past few years. Other thing which goes in favor of women, in favor of beer, is that women prefer beer than spirits, which is changing a little bit in the recent years. And the other thing is beer is more urban oriented. So if you look at the rural areas, spirits would be consumed. So let's look at the geographical contribution. So south and west account for about 65% of the volumes for beer, given the warm climate that both these zones have. Whereas north, which is much more cooler, accounts for about 25%. Whereas if you see the spirit segment, north accounts for 33%, and south is somewhere around 25%, west is about 22%. In this IMFL, if you look at geographic wise mix, north prefers whiskey more, whereas south prefers brandy and rum. So, what are the raw materials for a beer company? One is packaging material. Packaging material is a huge cost for beer. Given the low price points at which it sells, the cost of the bottle costs a lot. So the 60 packaging material is about 60% of the raw material cost for them, whereas raw materials is 37%, and balance is 3%. So out of that raw material cost of 37%, 50% of it is barley. So barley is something which is scarce in our country, and it grows only in a couple of months, April, May, in India, and it can also be used as a cattle feed. So MSP prices here have been increasing, and that's why the raw material price for them also has been increasing. So let's compare United Breweries to AB InBev and Carlsberg, which are global companies. Uh, so in this sense, I would say that UBL is much more competitive in terms of margins over the years compared to what we saw in USL when we compared it to Diageo and Pernod. So gross margins are about 58% for AB InBev and about 54-55% for UBL. EBITDA margins, if you see, AB InBev is at about 30%, whereas Carlsberg is at 23%, and UBL is about 13-14%. Return on equity numbers. So AB InBev obviously has made a few acquisitions, and that's why the return on equity number has come down a lot. Whereas if you look at the UBL and Carlsberg, it's at about 12-13%. Return on capital employed numbers. UBL is at about 11-12% right now, and Carlsberg is at about 9-10%, whereas AB InBev has come down to about 1%. So just to sum it up, so what are the key variables or the factors that we need to look at in the Alcobev industry? One is that we need a license to produce, so which may be difficult to come by for newcomers. Second, pricing power is absent, so we need to be careful of the excise duty increases and the raw material increases. Third is that the distribution is also regulated, especially in some of the states where government controls the distribution. Fourth is that there's no promotion which is allowed, so you cannot promote your brands, advertise your brands. So there has to be surrogate advertising, like we have seen with Kingfisher over the years. And the other threat that you see to the beer industry is the craft beer or the microbreweries that we have seen over the last few years. This is just to give you a reference. Obviously, this is not a recommendation. This is just to discuss what has been happening with the market cap and the stock price of USL. So in May 2013, Diageo acquired a 10% stake for 2,092 crores in United Spirits, which comes to a market cap of 21,000 crores. In 2014, they bought another 26% from public at they gave an open offer, valuing the company at about 43,900 crores, which was basically double of what they paid in May 2013. And they raised their stake to 54-55%. Whereas if you see today, the market is valuing it at 38,000 crores. So basically, a market is saying that it's valued at almost the same price at which Diageo bought it in 2014. This is the price chart of both United Spirits and UBL over the last 10 years. So you see large periods of basically the stock doing nothing. From 2013 to 2014, just before Diageo acquired, there was nothing that happened in that stock. And post the Diageo acquisition, post about 1 year after the Diageo acquisition, from 2016 onwards, it's basically done nothing. The price has remained there for about 5 years. In UBL also, you see a similar thing, where the price remained stable from 2013 to 2017, and then again it's come down a lot. So yeah, we have seen large periods of basically the stocks doing nothing. So this is my conclusion about these companies. It's okay to get tipsy about all the macro conclusions that people make, that it's an underpenetrated category, the consumption will grow, we see people drinking in pubs, etc. All this is fine. It's socially becoming acceptable. More women are drinking. All these factors have been there for a few years now. But if you look at the hard numbers, it's actually not translating into the numbers. And on the other side, the valuations also are not that attractive. At the same time, if you see other consumer staple categories, they have been growing at a pretty similar growth rates, and the valuations there are also pretty similar to what these companies are trading. So my conclusion is get tipsy, but not high on these companies. Thank you, and we can take questions.
Thanks, Raj. It's a wonderful presentation. I like the last line as well. If you have any questions, why don't you guys just unmute yourself and ask one by one, or you can put them in the chat and I can moderate the session.
No one else has any questions. You can have a BYOB session here itself.
I think that's what is going on. Raj, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Before somebody else catches up, I just ask one question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned packaging material is becoming a large kind of a cost item for all these companies. Are there any interesting packaging material companies who serve this industry, which can be tracked?
So I haven't gone into those glass packaging companies, or I haven't looked at those glass companies, so I would not want to comment on it. But what they have done is recently they have been recycling this glass. From last year post COVID, they have stopped recycling because of the health issues, and hence you see the costs also going up for them. At the same time, the summer months being washed away because of these lockdowns and only delivery allowed, etc. So yeah, I don't know how to actually look at those glass companies.
So Manish has a question. Manish, go ahead, please.
So Raj, thanks for the presentation. Have you looked at like the energy drink or the flavored water markets, right? And that seems to be a big thing amongst the teenagers and the younger generation.
So,
and if there are any listed companies, and your comments.
So
Thanks.
most of these are unlisted companies, especially in India. Some of them, something like a Varun Beverages distributes PepsiCo products, as well as it has some water plus flavored drinks plus energy drinks within its segment. So Varun Beverages is a very interesting company. Again, it almost distributes about PepsiCo products across almost all of India now, and if you look at the margin numbers and the return numbers versus PepsiCo's numbers, it's pretty competitive. So despite being a bottler to a global multinational, the margins are pretty decent over there. Again, for Varun Beverages, what has happened is that the summer months being very strong last year was bad for them. Plus, now this year, if this prolongs into a 2-3 month kind of a lockdown, then that will also become a problem for them. But apart from that, I haven't looked at any global energy drink or flavored water.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Ronald.
There's a question from Sagi Shah. He's asking, what is your view on the new CEO of USL?
So USL, Anand Kripalu has been there for about I think 3-4 years now. So it's he's not a new CEO. Whereas UBL has seen a change in CEO recently. So yeah, Anand Kripalu, if the question is relating to USL CEO, I think he has done pretty well. So he had come from the background of consumer brand, and he has been able to actually do the premiumization as he wanted, at the same time cut costs and debt, and he has been doing pretty well.
Hi, can I ask?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Premal, please go ahead.
Yeah, if you have looked at Pernod is doing pretty well from last 4 years. I believe you said it's not in the popular segment; it's more in the premium segment. Then have you checked is USL, if we remove the popular segment out of the USL brand, suppose just for the sake, is USL doing well? If suppose is EBITDA margins are equal to the Pernod size or not? And the second, to answer your first question, I think there's a change in guard in USL of late, just 3 months before, and he's been stepped down, and one lady has come in from the internal department. Yeah.
Okay. I might have missed.
Yeah.
Sorry. So they don't bifurcate the margins between both these segments. So I don't know if you remove the popular segment where the margins of USL would be. But if you look at the last 1.5 years, they have been outsourcing it to the franchisees, and hence a lot of it is already out of the system. So the margins that you see today, I think most of it would not include the popular segment. And
last question, how are the valuation, it's been listed. Diageo parent has been listed there. So you had one slide of the margin, but on the valuation parameters, if you can throw some light.
So valuation currently is at, so all the spirits and the beer companies globally are currently trading between 20 and 30 times. Whereas if you see a few years back, some of them were trading even at 15 times also. So globally, we haven't seen the valuations that we are seeing here for all these companies. So if you see the market cap growth of USL and UBL from 2004 till date, it's a big number of about 35-40%. But most of it was front-ended between 2004 and 2008. Whereas if you look at the last 8 to 10 year CAGR, it's very low. So these companies globally, you get global diversification. At the same time, you get some brands which you don't get over here, and you get a distribution network all over the world. So I think some of them are pretty reasonable compared to the Indian counterparts.
Question. I think because Jain has mentioned that Anand Kripalu is exiting and Lady Hina Khan is joining from June.
I think everybody wants to watch the IPL match from 7:30. So
Great. If there are no new questions, Raj is available on Twitter. You can always bother him there. But thanks for joining in, and cheers to everyone. And we'll see you in the next FOF next month. We'll announce the date and send you a Zoom link shortly. Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Ronak.
Whenever things got rough, I always remember what my father used to say.
Running a business does test a man, my son. There are ups and downs, glorious highs, and sometimes a low that leaves you feeling defeated.
The character of a man and the character of a business are not very different, are they?
Yes. But when the chips are down, we must stand up, dust ourselves off, and motor on.
Volatility. It's a funny thing. It makes you question yourself and wonder if you've made all the right decisions.
Sure, you can question some of your decisions, but stay steadfast on your goals.
Dad always said, there are no shortcuts and no quick profits.
There are no free lunches, are there? There is only one
right way.
At PPFAS, we think like Rahul and his father. That volatility is a fact of running a business. And buying equity shares is like owning a part of that business. We use value investing principles to manage your money. This means we invest in the right businesses at reasonable prices and for a longer term.
PPFAS Mutual Fund. There's only one right way. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.